Hey guys, so what we're going to be doing right now is I'm going to be reading the story from chapter 1 of our new unit, which the chapter is called Welcome to the Middle Ages. And before I get into it, here's what I want you to think about. Here's the big question. And at the end of this lesson, you are going to have to answer this question in great detail. Okay. Now, when I say that, it means you're going to have to write me a short paragraph about this question. Okay, so here's the big question. What were some of the events that led to the Middle Ages? Now, as we read this, I need you to think. Look at this. See if you can find it. If you hear it, write it down. Okay? But every single one of you fourth graders are going to be getting a digital copy of this. Okay? Like I said in the introduction, I wanted to try to do this to make it a little easier on you so you don't keep up with it, but also because it's saving some paper. So you will have a digital copy of this to use to answer any and all questions that you will be assigned. So this is chapter 1. This is Welcome to the Middle Ages. So something that you need to pay attention to, all the pages are going to have images on them, whether they're small or, detailed. And usually with every image, you have some type of information that goes along with it. For example, with this picture right here, it says the medieval knights riding into battle. So pay very close attention to those things because that could help you in the long run. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water. Okay, so if you know anything about knights, castles, or Robin Hood, then you already know something about the Middle Ages in Europe. The Middle Ages may seem to be an unusual name for an historical period, especially one that lasted more than 1,000 years. People in the Middle Ages did not know they were in the middle of anything. They thought they were modern, just as you and I do today. In fact, the Middle Ages were not a phase used by the Middle Ages was not a phrase used by the people who lived during that time period. It is a term modern historians use today to refer to the time period between ancient and modern times. If you think back to the timeline that I showed you, that period in time between, that is known as the Middle Ages. All right. We begin our journey into medieval Europe. Another name for the Middle Ages. Another name for the Middle Ages is medieval. By examining some key events that happened long before the age begins. So remember what our big question was, okay? The first major event that helped to transform Western Europe occurred when the mighty Roman Empire, having grown too big for one emperor to rule, broke apart into the eastern and western parts of the empire. This division had a major impact on Western Europe. With the Roman Empire split into two parts, different tribes took the opportunity to seize some of its land. Interestingly, some of these people were given the name barbarian from the Latin word barbaros, meaning foreigner or not Roman. The Romans may have considered these people to be uncivilized because they did not speak Latin, the language of the Roman Empire. So if you look down here, and I do apologize for the coloring. So you have the Western Empire. Okay. So the Western Empire is going to be on this side. And then we have our Eastern Empire over here. We have different capitals. So the capital of the Western was Rome. The capital of the Eastern was Constantinople. Now, these are just directions that many of the people went. So as you can see, a lot of them were venturing to the middle of Europe. Okay, so that's how they were taking the land. Some of the most successful barbarian invaders were Germanic tribes, such as the Franks, the Vascots, and the Vandals. These tribes lived on the edges of the empire. As the Romans became unable to defend their borders, these tribes pushed further to the west. The Vandals looted towns and villages so badly that today we use the word vandalism to describe the destruction of property. The most infamous so called barbarians were called the Huns of Central Asia. Attila the Hun led this nomadic tribe as they invaded parts of Europe in the 400s. As the Huns conquered, they drove the once dominated dominant Germanic tribes even further into Western Roman Empire. So this we have up here Attila the Hun. All right. As warlike tribes swept across Western Europe, the powerful kings emerged. Another transforming force appeared, the Christian church. Throughout these years of change, many people turned to the church because it offered them a sense of stability and hope. The heart or center of the church was in Rome, the seat of the papacy. Slowly, more and more groups of people became Christians, including the Germanic tribes. Over time, the church became even richer and more powerful than many kings and queens. At this time, when the Roman Empire was no longer the only powerful force in Europe, that many historians consider to be the start of the Middle Ages. Roman, Germanic, and Christian ideas, as well as powerful kings, began to shape Western Europe. One of the most dramatic regions, a great ruler emerged. His name was Charles, and he took control of much of the land and that later became France. Charles ruled for more than 45 years. He increased the size of his empire by gaining land in areas that are now part of Germany, Austria, Italy, and Spain. As king, Charles defended the authority of the church. He promoted the spread of Christianity. On Christmas Day in 18 I'm sorry, on Christmas Day in 800 CE, he was crowned Roman emperor by the Pope in Rome. His reputation was so great, later writers called him Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great. So this image right here is Pope Leo III is crowning Charles or Charlemagne, Roman emperor in 800 CE. Charles encouraged new ideas and promoted an interest in education and art. Sorry, my finger got away from me. To help him rule his empire, Charlemagne also encouraged a system of government that we now know as feudalism. Feudalism. He gave land instead of money to those who worked for him in the military and government. The practices of paying men with land spread throughout the countries in Western Europe. Life in the Middle Ages was not the same as it is now. For one thing, people who lived back then probably thought about time differently. Many people measure time by the rising and setting of the sun and the passing seasons. For this reason, life likely had a slower, steadier pace. In addition, there was a strong desire to honor God that appeared to transcend time. As a result, people undertook impressive long term projects such as building magnificent cathedrals that took centuries to complete. If you look over to the left, you have the Cologne Cathedral. It took 632 years to complete. That's a long building project. Language and location helped shape people's lives too. Because travel was so difficult, many people didn't do it. Generally, only rich, educated people in Europe traveled. Almost everyone else stayed close to home. Although Latin was the language of both the church and the government, only select members of society could understand that language. Most people lived an isolated existence. They did not travel far from home. As a result, Most people communicated using the language or dialect spoken in the place of their birth. As strange as it may seem to us, in certain parts of Europe, villagers from places just 30 miles apart could not easily understand each other. For this reason, most people during the Middle Ages were concerned with the affairs of their village, what they owned, the local lord in the way of payment, and how to ensure their place in heaven. So, what we have right here is a diagram that shows the medieval feudal society. Now, this is basically a diagram of the importance you played in Europe during the Middle Ages. Now, it does show the people with the most power on top, which is the king, and the people with the least power in the bottom. That is the freemen and the serfs. Now, this is why they call them feudalist. When you see this, it's known as feudalism. Okay, so at the very bottom we have right here the freemen and the serfs. They do the farming. They do a lot of the work on the land, basically. Then, if you go up the next one, you have the middle class, which includes the merchants and the craftsmen. These are the people that sell items in stores or little markets, or the people that make stuff that are important to the society. Now, your next one would be your nobles. Your nobles include your lords, your knights could be included, and your church leaders. But at the very top, you have your king. Now, all these people who are under the king are very loyal. Now, the thing is, the king's job is to protect everyone that's underneath him. So, what would happen is the king would give land to nobles or to knights or lords that serve them. And their job was to basically take care of the freemen and the serfs who were in that area. Also, they may have taken care of the middle class, but everyone protects the person below them, or at least that's how it should have been set up. But it wasn't all, roses and rainbows for these people. It was a very difficult time. Now, there was another force that had a huge impact on Western European society during the Middle Ages. This force came in the form of a deadly disease. The disease, called the Black Death or Plague, certainly made its mark upon medieval Europe. This dreadful plague first appeared in the 500s. In the second half of the 1300s, it swept through Europe once again, spread by infected fleas that lived on rodents. Now, rodents, another name for a rat or a mouse. The Black Death probably killed 1/3 of the population of Western Europe. Despite conflicts and hardships, this period in history is also known as a time when people created impressive, inspiring architecture. Great castles and churches great churches and castles began to adorn the landscape. Kings, queens, and noblemen held jousts, and court gestures entertained noble families. Jousts are those fights where the people are on the horses and they have the big, long little stick with the point at the end. And then those court gestures are the funny people with the hats that they wear. In castles and in knights, castles, and chivalry, you will discover that it was like to work in the land for the local lord. You will also learn what life was like in an incredibly crowded town in the Middle Ages. You will wander through the castles and find out how young men train to be knights. Are you ready to explore this fascinating time in history? So, here are a few things just to think about, some musings. Number one, in the Middle Ages, people used a pleasant smelling plant, sometimes used in cooking, to clean their teeth. I wonder what the name of that plant was. And here's the deal, if I have somebody email me that, I'll give you extra credit. Email me that answer. Number two, an instrument that helps us to see far away objects, such as the stars, was invented in the Middle Ages. What's the name of that instrument? Email it to me. But guys, your emails, your answers must be in a complete sentence or you will not get credit. So every person that emails me an answer to any of these three questions, you'll get some extra credit, guys. During the early part of the Middle Ages, Angles and Saxons and Jutes invaded the island nations and remained its settlers. The Anglers became their name to the land and kingdom. What was the kingdom called? All right, guys, so that is chapter one of the story of the Welcome to the Middle Ages. Now, remember, if you need to listen to this multiple times, it's fine. Or that's it. If you want to listen to it again, you can always go to the hub, which is associated with the CKLA, which is Amplify on your Google Classroom. So this was me reading you chapter one, and we'll get started later. Talk to y'all later. Bye.